If you need a Bible this morning, we're going to be in Judges chapter 15, so you can turn your own Bible to Judges chapter 15, or you can raise your hand and our ushers will get you one. And a lot of the scriptures will be on the screens as well, but some of them will also be in your bulletin. So I encourage everybody to have a Bible. Judges chapter 15, that's where we're going to be. We continue our third week looking at this frustrating character, fascinating character named Samson. Samson was called apart by God. He was set apart at birth to be God's man to help save the Israelites from Philistine oppression. And that's what Samson was supposed to do. And God gave him this incredibly supernatural strength so he could do what God called him to do. Samson had so much God-given potential, but he made bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. We've seen that now for the past 2 weeks, and we're going to see it again today. And yet God, in the midst of this Samson story, is so incredibly faithful. I mean, He is faithful. And so I would encourage you, if you haven't already, if you haven't been here for the last few weeks, you can go to www.mvcclive.com, catch up that way. Next week we'll conclude this series that we've been looking at, and he's a fascinating character. And a lot of what I've been talking about, or who I've been talking to, have been the men. All right? And some of you ladies have used your elbows for the last few weeks. Right? Something like that? Okay, at least if I was sitting by my wife, I'm sure she'd use her elbows, all right? Here's my question as we get started this morning. How many of you made New Year's resolutions? Huh? Come on, let me see your hands. Be brave. How many of you have already broken those New Year's resolutions? Okay, a couple of us. Listen, I had one this week, and I'm not going to tell you what, but I had one this week where I'm like, I am not going to do this again, and it was actually replacing something I used to do with something anyway, and this week I blew it. And I'm sitting here as I'm preparing for this message, and I'm like, Samson blows it again. I'm just like Samson. And I think, how in the world could I get up there and talk to people about not blowing it, right? Here's the deal. We need to remember, we're all lumps of clay. And God is the potter, and He wants to shape us, and He wants to mold us, and He wants us to make us the people that He created us to be. And that's exactly what He did with Samson. So Judges chapter 15, the very end of the chapter. It's where we left off last week. Verse 19, listen to this. God split open this hollow place that is at Lehi, and water came out from it. And when he drank, his spirit returned, and he revived. You remember, he had just slayed 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. 1,000 men. He was exhausted. He was thirsty. And he realized he was either going to die or he needed something to drink. Because if he didn't get something to drink, he wouldn't have the energy to run from those who are now ready to kill him. And he falls before God in his weakest moment. And he has the deepest need. He's thirsty. And he looks to God and he says, I'm thirsty. Give me something to drink. And at that very place, God opens the earth and there's some water for Samson to drink from it. And as he drinks from the water, what happens? His spirit, it returns. He's revived. He's strong again. And verse 20 says this, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines for 20 years. How long? 20 years. Samson led Israel for 20 years. This was the most amazing verse in the entire Samson account. It is the first time in the Samson account that he actually does what he was created to do. It's the first time he actually does what God wanted him to do. It seems as if he's following God for the first time, listening to God, using the God-given talents that he had been given to judge Israel, just like he was called to do. And it's the one part of the verse that tells us there seemed to be peace. There seemed to be justice. There seemed to be something special about this 20 years where he judged. He was doing what he created to do. But by the end of today, we'll see Samson with so much God-given talent and potential make another big, bad decision. Samson will have his eyes gouged out, his hands shackled, and he'll be the laughing stock in front of his enemies. Do you ever wonder how a man with so much potential, so much strength and power can mess up his life so badly? Have you ever wondered? He did it the same way that we mess up today. It's not like Samson woke up one morning and poof, his life was a mess. You see, Samson messed up his life one step at a time. Samson took small steps that led to his destruction. Small steps that led to his destruction. Listen to this, chapter 16, verse 1. Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute, and he went into her. And the Gazites were told, Samson has come here. And they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at this gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait till the light of the morning, then we will kill him. Samson was judging and doing what God created him to do with a time of unprecedented peace and justice. Samson went to Gaza and he spent the night with a prostitute, and this is enemy territory again. You remember? Just a few weeks ago he did the same thing. He went to Timnah and saw a woman and told his mom and dad, I want her, get her for me, I want her now. And so here he goes again, he goes into Gaza. This is enemy territory. News spreads that Samson is there. Do you think they've got a vengeance out for him? And so a group of Philistines, they gathered together and they wait. They wait. Why? They're going to kill him. Gaza is the capital city. It is the headquarters of the Philistines. Samson goes into Philistine territory, right into the capital square, and lays with a prostitute. Samson travels 25 miles from his hometown to Gaza to risk 20 years of peace, to risk 20 years of faithfulness. How? One step at a time. I can imagine that he was comfortable with the area of Timnah, and that was 4 miles from his hometown. So somewhere along the road he went 5 miles. And he went 6 miles on another journey. And then that wasn't quite far enough, so somehow he ended up 15 miles, and then today he ends up 25 miles from his hometown. Who would be so crazy to risk so much for so little? The answer? We do. We do. We do this kind of stuff every single day, especially men. Men have a good marriage, good integrity, good career, good kids, and we'll risk it all for a sexual experience, a quick hit, or a fast money-making challenge. For Samson to walk 25 miles, for him to journey 25 miles, means he took 56,250 steps to get there. 56,000 steps to get there. How do we destroy our lives? We usually don't destroy our lives all at once. We destroy our lives one step at a time, don't we? And what's really fascinating is Samson had 56,000 chances to stop. He had 56,000 steps to say, I need to turn around and I need to go the other way. And what's really amazing is that Samson had those opportunities to say, I can turn around. I don't need to go there. And the problem is that most of us, especially men, we don't plan on getting to the place we get. We don't plan on messing our lives up all at once. I've never met a human being, and I've never met a man who said they intended to be a perverted sex addict. I've never heard it. But what happened is they started satisfying one craving at a time. I've never met a man who set out to be a porn addict. I've never met one who said that was their intention, that that's what they wanted to do. I've never met a man who wanted to become broke. But it was one bet after another bet that got fun, and next thing they know, they're broke. I've never met a man who thought, I've got a great marriage, great kids, and things are so good, I think I'll mess it up and have an affair. I've never heard that. Neither did any of these men say, I just woke up one morning and there she was in the bed next to me. I don't know how that happened. I just don't get it. I don't know how we got to that place. And the reality is this: it took multiple steps to get to that place, to get to have an extramarital relationship. It was a wink across the room and a touch and a text and a call. And then it was just one wink. It was two winks, wink, wink, and text, text, and call, call, and touch, touch. And the next thing you know, there she is. It took multiple steps to get there. Samson took small steps that led him to destruction. And we find three very clear steps in the text we're going to read here. And the first one is this: Samson taunted his enemy. He taunted his enemy. He was out to taunt these people. Listen to verse 3. But Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron. Samson is with a woman. The Philistines are waiting for him, and Samson goes out in the middle of the night. He takes their doors to the city gate and he rips them off. History gives us an idea that these doors weighed about 700 pounds. He takes the doors, he runs off with them. He's basically telling the Philistines, fill in the blank, because the doors symbolize their security. The doors symbolize, it's like breaching homeland security here. They've just told this city they're in bad shape. They're in bad shape. He's telling them that they're not safe around him. He taunts his enemy. We forget often and we underestimate often that we have a very real spiritual enemy, who is on the mission to steal, to kill, and to destroy everything that matters to the heart of God. Everything that matters to the heart of God. Men, the enemy isn't interested in wounding or hurting you. The enemy wants to destroy you. He wants to take you down and knock you out. And we taunt and we underestimate the enemy by putting ourselves in places of temptation over and over again. One simple, single step at a time. Many of you want to honor God with your sexual purity, but you end up in a place, or you get a girlfriend who spends the night. You're taunting your enemy. A married guy goes on a business trip, and everyone's going out and they're all drinking a little bit, and you think you can handle it, but after a few drinks you suddenly realize you're surrounded by beautiful women. What are you doing? You're taunting your enemy. Financially, you're strapped. You have no money. And you decide to pull into that car lot and just look. I just want to look. We're not going to buy anything. We're just going to look. You're taunting your enemy. And a lot of us think we're okay. Why? Because we think we're strong enough. We think we've got enough power. We think we're good enough. We think we're bold enough. And 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12 says it. If you think you are standing strong, be careful not to fall. I love the way the Message says this verse, and I believe we have it for the screen here. These, Eugene Peterson says, these are all the warning markers. Danger in our history books, written down so that we don't repeat their mistakes. Our positions in the story are parallel. They at the beginning, we at the end, and we are just as capable of messing it up as they were. Don't be so naive. Don't be so self-confident. You're not exempt. You could fall flat on your face as easily as anyone else. Forget about self-confidence. It's useless. Cultivate God confidence. Don't taunt your enemy. If you think you're standing strong, you could fall. Be sure not to taunt your enemy. The second thing that we see in Samson's life is this. Samson rationalized the same sin. He rationalized the same sin. Do you remember what happens when Samson sees the woman in Timnah? He wants her, right? Which led then to him touching this dead lion carcass, eating some honey out of it. You remember this whole story? led him to drinking too much, which was breaking all of these Nazirite laws that he had. And so Samson once again goes into Philistine territory. He finds a prostitute, but not only does he find a prostitute, you would think after the first time and after the second time, maybe he would have learned his lesson. But verse 4 says this: after this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Now, Delilah gets picked on so much, doesn't she? What was her name? Delilah. We all know. And this is the third time. This is the third time Samson goes messing around with a Philistine woman. The third time. You would have thought he would have learned after the first or the second, but no, he has a third chance. And aren't we often masters of rationalizing our same old sin? We say things like, this is my thing. This is how I cope. This is how I deal with life. I mean, it would be one thing if I was messing up in a whole lot of areas, but this is just that one area, and it's not that big of a deal. I'm pretty good, and everybody has something anyway. I'm not as bad as others. It could be worse. And then, if that's not good enough, we say, well, it's nobody's business anyway. I work hard. I do what I need to do. Everybody else just needs to mind their own business. This is how I deal with things. We are masters. We are masters at rationalizing the same old sin, and that's exactly what Samson does. Listen to verse 5. And the lords of the Philistines come up to her and said to her, seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. He's going to get it again, isn't he? The first time he didn't learn anything. The second time he apparently didn't learn anything. Here he is the third time. So get this, verse 6. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies and how you might be bound that one could subdue him. And Samson said to her, if they bind me up with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. And so what happens is she calls the lords of the Philistines, and they're hiding in the room, and she yells after they tie him up with these bowstrings, the Philistines are upon you, and he breaks them, and he's free. So then verse 10, Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Please tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, if they bind me with new ropes that have not ever been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And the men lying in the ambush were in the inner chamber, but he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. So then Delilah, she says, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web and fasten it tight with the pin, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. And so she does. And she says, the Philistines are upon you. He's taunting his enemy. And it's not just that she's a woman, it's that she's a Philistine woman, and he's taunting the enemy because he knows how weak he is already with women. But then to add that she's a Philistine on top of it. So while he slept, verse 14, Delilah took the 7 locks of the head and wove them in the web, and she made them tight with the pin and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep, and he pulled away the pin, the loom, and the web. And she said to him, get this, how can you say, I love you? Samson, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You won't tell me your secret. You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies. And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. In other translations, it's she nagged so much that he was bored to death. He nagged. She nagged. She begged him, and she used those sweet lies. How can you tell me you love me if I don't know what's going on in your heart? And so verse 17, And he told her all of his heart, all of it. All of it. He said to her, "A razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man." Samson told her everything. He told her that no razor had touched his head. He said to her that his head, if it was shaved, he would lose all of his strength. And did you catch what he told her? Did you catch what he told her? He said, "Delilah, I've been set apart from God from birth." As if almost for a moment, Samson remembers what he was created to do and who he was created to be. As almost for a moment, he remembered what battle he was in and what he should not be doing. Samson didn't mess up his life all at once. He did it one step at a time. For us, there are many of us who have forgotten. We have forgotten the men and the women that God created us to be. God didn't just put you on this earth so that you can take up space. He didn't put you on earth to take up space. God put you here to utilize your gifts and to utilize your talents and your passions and the calling that He gave you to make a difference in the world. That's why you're here. And Samson, for a moment, remembers that in verse 19. He remembers it. But then verse 19 says this: "She made him sleep on her knees, and she called a man, and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. And then she began to torment him, and his strength left." His strength left. What happened? The Spirit left him. The strength left him. It makes me wonder how many of us go through different battles we face every single day, forgetting to tap into the power of God. Samson didn't mess up his life all at once. He messed it up one step at a time. Samson taunted his enemy and he rationalized his sin. And the third observation that I make is this: Samson saw his strength as a right and not a gift. Samson saw his strength as a right and not a gift. Just like Samson, we forget that our strength is a gift and not a right. And this is what Samson thought. He thought his sin and he thought his disobedience to God and his breaking the Nazirite vow would never, ever cost him. He thought that he could get away with it like he had every other time before. But listen to verse 20 of chapter 16. It says this: "And she said, 'The Philistines are upon you, Samson.' And he awoke from his sleep, and he said, 'I will go out as at other times and shake myself free.'" He says it. "I've got my power. I've got my strength. I'm good enough. I'm good enough." So he says he'll break himself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. He didn't even know it. He didn't even acknowledge it. And it made me wonder this week, how often do we attempt to fix things and do things in our lives and in our homes and in our families, and we never invite God to be a part of it? We do it because we think we're big enough and we're strong enough and we've got enough power to accomplish it. How many of us do that every single day of our lives? Samson thought that he had just break free, like he had the first 3 times. That his strength would come back and he'd have no problem. He thought that his disobedience and his sin would never cost him. He thought it was his right, and he forgot that it was a gift. And this time things didn't work out as he thought. The verse tells us that the Spirit left him and he didn't even know it. But this time Samson is overtaken. And it says this in verse 21: "And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes, and brought him down to Gaza, and bound him with bronze shackles. And he ground at the mill in the prison." Samson lost sight, figuratively and literally, of the man that God created and gifted him to be. He lost sight of the man that he was created to be, of the man he was gifted to be. And for so many of us, it's that moment of truth, that moment of truth. And I want you to be honest with yourself. I really want you to look inside yourself and answer this question. Where are you stepping away from God? Where are you stepping away from God? Possibly you're a Christian, but you've drifted. You've drifted. It's possible that you think you're strong enough without God's Word, and you're strong enough without prayer, and you're strong enough without plugging into Him. It's possible that you think your hair is long still, and that you're capable of everything, and you've got the outward signs because you still come to church and you're still here. But inwardly, your heart has drifted from God. Where are you stepping away from God? Possibly it could be lust that's causing you to step away from God. It's that attitude of, I want it. And it could be a lust-filled world, or it could be the things that you just want and desire and lavish for. It could be that entitlement mindset that we talked about a few weeks ago, where you think you deserve it, you've earned it. It could be the attitude of pride, that I can handle it, I've got it all under control. It could be your anger, like we talked about last week. Where is it that you're stepping away from God? What area of your life are you stepping away from Him? Proverbs 26:11, a beautiful verse, not so much, says this: as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness. Where is it that you're stepping away from God? You've got to identify and you've got to acknowledge that area in your life, whether it's the first step or whether it's the 56,000th step. If you're stepping away from God, I want to give you the recipe for success. Okay? If you're stepping away from God, whatever your steps are, this is what you've got to do. Stop and turn around and step the other way. And it's so simple, yet sometimes we miss it so often because we think we're good enough, we think we're power enough. And when we turn around and we step the other way, the most beautiful thing, the most awesome thing happens. As you turn around, who's right there waiting for you? He is. And I thought last week's verse was the most grace-filled verse in the entire Bible, where God split open the earth and gave him water to drink, and he revived. But then, as I think of Samson, as he's publicly shamed and publicly humiliated, he's the laughing stock, his hair's cut, and he's standing before everyone. Samson even begins to acknowledge that his hair is gone and he's disobeyed God. But verse 22, listen to this, I think is the most grace-filled verse in the entire Bible. It shows God's amazing love, His incredible mercy, and His indescribable grace. It says this: but the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Why is that verse there? Because this is how God is. This is how God's mercy is and how perfect His grace is. Listen, if you've stepped away from God, turn back. Turn back. I love that 1 Corinthians verse that I read earlier. It says this: if you think you're standing strong, if you think you're standing strong, be careful not to fall. The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience. And God, He is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. However, when you are tempted, don't miss this. He will show you a way out so that you can endure. Did you get that? God will show you a way out so that you can endure. I love this verse because it shows us God's love and God's mercy and God's grace. And as Dave sang earlier, where is He? Right there. Right there. Answer the question: where are you stepping away from God? And then acknowledge how great His love is and how awesome His grace is. and turn back to Him. And He will begin to give you a way out.